Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. I get why you gave a nuanced response originally. So, right, and I think I agree if I understood you with everything you just said. So, yeah, just I'm just saying, thinking out loud here just to clarify. So, right, where the purist, the Bitcoin maxi type person's coming from is to say, if it's something like Bitcoin in its pure form, that right, using the blockchain or whatever, that's it says, if we say who owns these Satoshis, it's like, oh, it's at this address. And how do we know? Well, because that's what the blockchain says and it's validating. We know the proof of work and blah, 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 and all that stuff. Okay. And then it's not a separate thing. Whereas if you used a blockchain that was purely decentralized, a public blockchain and so on, but what the thing was to say, oh, yeah, the person at this address has this thing that we just all agree means you own the house at this address, this physical address. That's what it means to say you have that token, at your address on the blockchain. Well, then that's a separate step, right? Because, ultimately, if the local police don't agree, because I don't care what you show me on your computer screen. Like, no, the local strongman said that he owns that because it goes back to his grandfather, and so and we have more guns.
That's right.
We have a bunch of guns, and he owns it, right? Like, so that's kind of with the disconnect. What they're saying. Whereas in Bitcoin, as long as the network, the community of Bitcoin users agrees with that, if you're on the right fork of the chain, then that's the same thing. To say, no, I really do own those Bitcoins, it's the same thing as saying I control them. Whereas with a quote real world asset that corresponds to something where the blockchain's like pointing to something external to the chain that is itself valuable, then they're saying there's an extra step involved. But I think what you just said dovetails perfectly with that. And I guess the dispute's then just to say you and I agree with that distinction, say, yep, there is an extra layer involved, but it's still worth doing. Whereas the purists say, well, no, so therefore it's not worth doing.
Yeah, at some point, the digital always has to interface with the real world. And Bitcoin maxis, you don't have to have that interface until the moment you want your Bitcoin to trade with something in the real world. And then you have all of those same questions, right? Legalities, how do you off-ramp? How do you on-ramp? Do you need ID? Must you KYC? Like all of these questions are going to keep coming up. And so, yeah, in complete agreement with you. But at some point, even Bitcoin has to interface with that second layer if you want to extract value from it, right? Or exchange value with a counterparty that's not a digital good.
Right. Okay, maybe just the few minutes we have left here, I want to circle back. So in your LinkedIn profile, I knew this also from previous conversations with you, but you say, let's see, I'm passionate about using code, creative marketing, design, and entrepreneurship as tools for social good and poverty elimination. So can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So, the work that I mentioned at Center House and the stuff that I did at Acumen, first I'll point everyone to acumen.org, an amazing organization that I've seen internally that really lives the values that it supports externally. But I think we've seen over the past, maybe 50 or 60 years that the fastest path towards eliminating poverty in the world is through business means, whether that is through, dare I say it, raw capitalism or through compassionate capitalism. There's many variant names of that. And I think it ultimately comes down to looking at the world through a lens where everyone has dignity and you have a goal of giving everyone equality of opportunity. Maybe not equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity. And everything that we're doing, whether it's tech or blockchain or even the financial services system, et cetera, it's just all tools to some human endpoint. And you can go through life just trying to make a number go up until you die. Or I think you can have, a focus where you're curious about the world and you view other people as mirrors of yourself rather than some enemy to be, ran from or criticized. And I think when you do that, you start to become more and more excited about using the tools that you have for better means, whatever better means to you.
Yeah, and I think it dovetails with what we were talking about earlier about like the adoption, that we're not going to get people in the financial sector to start using blockchain more unless the bottom line goes up, unless it makes financial sense to do it, in which case you don't have to evangelize. Right. It's going to happen sort of spontaneously. a different analogy. I remember people talking about like space exploration and, what do we build a moon colony or what? And ultimately, I think that stuff's all going to happen once, private business figures out, well, how do we make money, putting a station on Mars or whatever whatever the thing may be. Like it's instead of just governments pouring R&D into it, which may happen up front, but in the long run, to get something to work, it's got to be profitable. And likewise too, with what we're doing in infineo, we have in our staff like a lot of religious people. And so I say to them, it's not just that I think we're going to be a very big company and be profitable, but we are going to be helping lots of people around the world, allowing people, especially if you're in a country that, the currency is very volatile. If you could just get online, even occasionally, and then have this account with infineo where, you have a life insurance policy that you make contributions to, and it's denominated, in a different currency that's more stable than yours, like just pointing out, look at how much that's going to help somebody, much more than a Canadian or American where they have, other conventional analog counterparts, but, people in certain places of the world, that's really going to be life-changing. So it's, but again, to make that, what's going to motivate people to go build those things that are going to help the billions of people around the world who are less fortunate than we are. I mean, yeah, you can try to rely on altruism, but really what motivates people and makes it sustainable is if it's sort of a win-win relationship.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, it's going to be a lot of different levers and a lot of different places, It's going to require, the religions of the world. It's going to require the capitalists of the world. It's going to require everything, every lever that we have. But, I think the true promise of where blockchain interacts with that is, I think there was a report by the World Bank in 2021. There's still 1.4 billion unbanked individuals in the world. And, there's roughly, 20 to, 40 million, depending on the day, nationless and refugees that are in between states in the world. Many of them having to flee, nation states where they own the property and they own education credentials and identity credentials and these things. And now they're no longer relevant and they can't prove they're a human, basically. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so if we get to the place where blockchain can integrate into the regulatory stack, and I know that is the devil for many in the whole Web3 community, sort of integration in both. But, I'm a realist, and you have to operate in the world in which we live, not just only in the world that we wish to be. And if you can get to a state where you can prove that your money, that your identity, that your nationhood, the property that you own is, valid, and someone couldn't tamper with the mutability of that, there's a lot of tools that open up in order to help the unbanked, the underserved, refugees, the nationless, etc. And I don't think you have to be a lefty or a righty in the American context to want to give people the basic forms of dignity and proper property ownership. And I think whether you're a Bitcoin maxi or you are anti-Bitcoin or whatever it may be, that is a goal that most people can get behind. The question is, how do we solve it? And any mechanisms that allow for truth over trust in the middle of that, I think, can be beneficial if we can get there. But it's going to require the regulatory stack and nations allowing for you to use rule of law to enforce ownership and of these identities and property, etc.
Yeah, I mean, just as something as pedestrian as like the DMV, right? Like in the United States, I don't know if this is true in other countries, but it's like sort of a running joke about how the Department of Motor Vehicles is the epitome of government inefficiency. So, but the last 10 times I've been to it, it actually hasn't been that bad. And it's because of technology. Like they have kept it. It's a lot quicker than it used to be. And again, it's because of technology. So likewise here, yeah, I think you and I are never going to be thrilled at the efficiency and altruistic zeal of the average politician around the world, but still the tools that you at Provenance and we here at infineo are trying to build, I think is going to help make it more efficient all around.